If you walk through the Marais district of Paris today, navigating the narrow medieval streets that somehow survived centuries of war and revolution, you will eventually come to number 51, Rue de Montmorency. It is a tall, narrow building, 3 stories high, squeezed between more modern structures. Its facade is weathered stone, the kind that looks like it has absorbed centuries of rain and smoke and human history. And covering that stone, if you look carefully, are symbols, strange symbols. A dragon, a salamander surrounded by flames, mysterious inscriptions in medieval French. A small plaque near the door reads, "Built by Nicolas Flamel, 1407. This building is over 600 years old. It is the oldest house in Paris. And if the legends are true, it was built by a man who discovered the secret of immortality. The house is now a restaurant, the Auberge Nicolas Flamel. You can make a reservation, sit at a table where medieval Parisians once lived, and eat dinner surrounded by alchemical symbols carved into 15th century stone. Tourists come from around the world to see it, to touch the walls, to stand where Nicolas Flamel supposedly stood when he was alive, or rather, where he stood before he supposedly died. Because according to the legends, Nicolas Flamel never really died. He only appeared to die in 1418 so that he could disappear from history and live forever in secret, having discovered the Philosopher's Stone, the legendary substance that grants immortality and transforms base metals into gold. This is the story of Nicolas Flamel, and unlike many legends, this one is rooted in verifiable history. Nicolas Flamel was a real person. He lived in Paris in the 14th and 15th centuries. He was a scribe and bookseller, a middle-class man of no particular importance. He married a woman named Perenelle. They lived a quiet, unremarkable life. And then, suddenly, inexplicably, Nicolas Flamel became wealthy. Dramatically, impossibly wealthy. And he claimed, in his own writings, that the source of his wealth was alchemy, that he had discovered the secret of transmutation, that on January the 17th, 1382, at exactly noon, he turned mercury into pure silver. And on April 25th of the same year, he turned mercury into gold. He recorded these dates. He wrote down the details. He claimed it was all true. And then he spent the rest of his life giving that wealth away, building hospitals and churches, funding homes for widows and orphans, carving mysterious symbols into stone for future generations to puzzle over. In 1418, Nicolas Flamel died, or so the records say. He was buried with honor in the church of Saint-Jacques-de-la-Boucherie, next to his beloved wife Perenelle, who had died years earlier. The good citizens of Paris mourned a generous philanthropist, and life went on. But centuries later, when the church was demolished during the French Revolution and the graves were opened, they found something strange. The graves were empty, no bodies, no bones, nothing. And then the sightings began. Reports of Nicolas Flamel, alive, unchanged, appearing in Paris, in India, at the opera in 1761, always the same age he had been in the portraits from the 1400s. An immortal alchemist, walking through history, watching empires rise and fall, keeping the secret of eternal life to himself. Before we continue, I want to ask you something. If you believe that history's greatest mysteries deserve to be explored, that the line between legend and truth is worth investigating, you can help us continue this work by liking this video and subscribing. Your support allows us to keep diving into the enigmas that fascinate us. Tonight, we will walk the streets of medieval Paris. We will follow Nicolas Flamel from obscure scribe to legendary alchemist. We will examine the book he claimed gave him the secret. We will trace his sudden, mysterious wealth. We will visit the buildings he constructed, still standing today, covered in symbols that no one has fully decoded. We will investigate the empty graves and the centuries of sightings. And we will ask the question that has fascinated people for 600 years. Did Nicolas Flamel really discover the Philosopher's Stone? Did he really achieve immortality? Or did he simply create the perfect legend? This is not a story of horror or crime. This is a story of mystery, of alchemy, of the eternal human quest to cheat death and unlock the secrets of the universe. It is the story of a man who may have succeeded, or who may have been the greatest mythmaker who ever lived. Welcome to the Midnight Archives. Nicolas Flamel was born around the year 1330 in the town of Pontoise, about 20 miles northwest of Paris. The exact date of his birth is unknown. Record-keeping for common people in the 14th century was sparse at best. We know he was born because he later existed. That's about all we can say with certainty about his early life. His family was not noble, they were not wealthy, they were respectable middle-class people, probably merchants or craftsmen. Somehow, Nicolas received an education which was unusual for someone of his station. The fact that he could read and write, not just in French but in Latin, suggests his family had some resources and saw value in learning. By the time he was a young man, Nicolas had learned the trade that would define his early life. He became a scribe. In an age when most people were illiterate, scribes were essential. They wrote contracts, copied documents, penned letters for those who couldn't write. They were the human photocopiers and word processors of the medieval world. Nicolas moved to Paris, the great city, the heart of France, sometime in his 20s. Paris in the 1350s was a city of perhaps 200,000 people, enormous by medieval standards. It was a city of narrow, winding streets, of Gothic churches reaching toward heaven, of markets and taverns and danger. The Seine River ran through its heart, and the Ile de la Cité in the middle of the river held the royal palace and the magnificent Notre Dame Cathedral, which was less than a century old and already considered one of the wonders of the world. Nicolas set up his shop on the Rue des Écrivains, literally the street of writers, where scribes and booksellers congregated. His shop was small, probably just a single room with a table, ink, parchment, and the tools of his trade. He would sit at his table near the street, visible to passers-by, ready to write whatever documents people needed. This was an honest living, a respectable trade, but it was not a path to wealth. Most scribes lived modestly, earning enough to eat and pay rent, but little more. Nicolas Flamel seemed destined for an ordinary life, a life that would leave no mark on history, a life that would be forgotten as soon as he died. And then, two things happened that changed everything. First, he met a woman named Perenelle, and second, a stranger walked into his shop carrying a very unusual book. In 1368, when Nicolas was about 38 years old, he married a woman named Perenelle. We don't know her family name. Women's identities in medieval records were often absorbed into their husbands. But we know she was a widow, older than Nicolas by a few years, and that she brought some property to the marriage from her first husband. By the standards of the time, this was a good match for both of them. Nicolas was an educated man with a stable profession. Perenelle was a woman of some means who needed the legal and social protection that came with having a husband. In medieval society, unmarried women had few rights and fewer opportunities. But by all accounts, Nicolas and Perenelle's marriage was more than a practical arrangement. Contemporary sources describe them as devoted to each other, as partners in the truest sense. In his later writings, Nicolas always refers to Perenelle not as his assistant or his wife in the possessive sense, but as his equal partner in the great work of alchemy. This was unusual. The medieval world did not generally recognize women's intellectual contributions, but Nicolas credited Perenelle as a full collaborator, someone whose knowledge and skill were essential to their success. This suggests either that she was genuinely extraordinary or that their relationship was extraordinary, or both. Importantly, Nicolas and Perenelle had no children. Whether this was by choice or by nature, we don't know. But it meant that the wealth they would later accumulate would not be divided among heirs. It would be theirs alone to use as they saw fit. For the first 10 or 15 years of their marriage, they lived simply and quietly. Nicolas worked at his scribe shop. Perenelle managed their household and perhaps helped with the business. They attended church regularly, the Church of Saint-Jacques de la Boucherie, which would later become their burial place. They were known in their neighborhood as honest, pious, charitable people. They were, in every way, unremarkable, until 1357. Because in that year, according to Nicolas's own account written decades later, something extraordinary happened. A stranger came to his shop. Let me read you Nicolas Flamel's own description of this encounter, written in his work Exposition of the Hieroglyphical Figures, which was published, supposedly, after his death. I, Nicolas Flamel, scrivener, living in Paris in the year 1399, in the dwelling of Saint-Jacques de la Boucherie, near to Saint-Jacques-la-Boucherie, though I learned only a little Latin because of the poverty of my parents. There fell into my hands for the sum of 2 florins a gilded book, very old and large. It was not made of paper or parchment as other books are, but of admirable rinds, as it seemed to me, of young trees. The cover was of brass, well bound, and graven all over with a strange kind of letters, which I take to be Greek characters, or some such ancient language. Let's pause here and understand what Nicolas is describing. This book was unlike any book he had ever seen. Medieval books were made of parchment, animal skin, or vellum, bound in leather or wood. But this book was made of what he calls rinds of young trees, possibly bark, possibly some kind of treated plant material. The cover was brass or copper, engraved with symbols he couldn't identify. The book had 21 leaves, 42 pages, divided into groups of 7. Every 7th page was blank, except for a symbolic image. The other pages were covered in text written in an unknown script and language, along with elaborate illustrations. Nicolas continues. The first leaf was written in great capital letters of gold. Abraham the Jew, prince, priest, Levite, astrologer, and philosopher to the nation of the Jews, by the wrath of God, dispersed among the Gauls, sendeth health. After this, it was filled with great execrations and curses against every person who should cast his eyes upon it, unless he were either a priest or a scribe. The book was supposedly written by Abraham Eliezer, a Jewish alchemist, and contained instructions for creating the Philosopher's Stone. But the instructions were encoded in symbols and allegory that Nicolas could not understand. The stranger who sold him this book asked for only 2 florins, a very small sum for such an elaborate object. Then the man left Nicholas's shop and was never seen again. Nicholas never learned who he was or where he got the book. Now, we must ask, is this story true? Did this really happen? Or did Nicolas Flamel invent this tale to explain wealth that came from less mystical sources? The mysterious book acquired from a mysterious stranger is a common trope in alchemical literature. It's almost too perfect a story. But whether the book was real or invented, what happened next is historically documented. Nicolas Flamel became obsessed with alchemy, and that obsession would define the rest of his life. For the next 21 years, from 1357 to 1378, Nicolas Flamel studied the book. He tried to decode its symbols. He compared it to other alchemical texts. He showed it to scholars, to physicians, to other alchemists. No one could help him. The images in the book haunted him. He described them in detail. A serpent being crucified, a desert where fountains boiled, a rose tree flowering in the midst of a garden, a king with a sword commanding soldiers to kill infants. These were clearly allegorical, symbolic of alchemical processes. But what did they mean? To understand Nicholas's obsession, we need to understand what alchemy was in the 14th century. Alchemy was not a fringe belief or a con game. It was a serious study, pursued by some of the greatest minds of the medieval and Renaissance world. Alchemists were the predecessors of modern chemists. They experimented with substances, trying to understand the nature of matter, working to transform base materials into noble ones. The Philosopher's Stone was the ultimate goal of alchemy. It was believed to be a substance, sometimes described as a red powder, sometimes as a liquid, sometimes as a crystalline solid, that had 2 miraculous properties. First, it could transmute base metals like lead or mercury into gold or silver. This was called chrysopoeia, the art of gold making. Second, when dissolved into a liquid called the elixir of life, it could cure any disease and grant immortality to whoever drank it. Modern chemistry tells us this is impossible. You cannot turn lead into gold through chemical processes. They are different elements, with different atomic structures. You can only transmute elements through nuclear reactions, which require massive amounts of energy. But in the 14th century, the structure of atoms was unknown. The very concept of elements as we understand them didn't exist. Matter was thought to be composed of 4 elements: earth, water, air, and fire, combined in various proportions. If you could manipulate these proportions, the alchemists reasoned, you could transform one substance into another. It was a logical theory, given the knowledge of the time, and many serious, intelligent people dedicated their lives to proving it. Nicolas Flamel was one of them. For 21 years, Nicolas studied the Book of Abraham. For 21 years, he tried and failed to understand its secrets. His scribe business continued. He and Perronel lived their quiet life. But the book obsessed him. He knew, or believed, that it contained the key to the Philosopher's Stone. He just couldn't unlock it. And then, in 1378, Nicholas made a decision. A radical, expensive, dangerous decision for a man of his modest means. He decided to travel to Spain, to leave Paris, to leave Perronel, to undertake a journey of hundreds of miles through potentially hostile territory, all in search of someone who could help him decode the book. It was a desperate gamble, but it was a gamble that would change everything. Because in Spain, Nicolas Flamel would finally find the key to understanding the Book of Abraham. He would meet a man who recognized the symbols, who understood the process, who could teach him the secret. And when Nicolas returned to Paris, he would have the knowledge he needed to attempt the great work, to try, at last, to create the Philosopher's Stone. The question is, did he succeed? In 1378, after 21 years of failed attempts to decode the Book of Abraham, Nicolas Flamel made a decision that must have seemed either brave or mad. He would travel to Spain. This was not a simple undertaking in the 14th century. Paris to Spain meant hundreds of miles on foot or horseback through territories that might be friendly or hostile, depending on the ever-shifting political landscape. There were bandits on the roads. There were wars. There were diseases. Travel was expensive and dangerous. And for a man of Nicolas's modest means, it represented a significant financial risk. But Nicolas had a plan. He would disguise his true purpose by traveling as a pilgrim on the Camino de Santiago, the Way of St. James, one of the most important pilgrimage routes in medieval Christianity. Thousands of pilgrims traveled this route every year, walking to Santiago de Compostela in northwestern Spain, where the remains of St. James the Apostle were supposedly buried. By joining this pilgrimage, Nicolas would have the protection of traveling in groups, the hospitality of churches and monasteries along the way, and a perfectly legitimate reason to be on the road. No one would question a pious scribe making a pilgrimage. But Nicolas's real destination was not Santiago de Compostela. His real goal was to find Jewish scholars who might be able to read the Book of Abraham. Why Spain? Because in the 14th century, Spain, specifically the kingdoms of Castile and Aragon, had large, thriving Jewish communities. These communities were centers of learning, known throughout Europe for their scholars who studied not just the Talmud and Torah, but also mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and mystical traditions like Kabbalah. Jewish scholars were often consulted on matters of ancient languages and esoteric knowledge. If anyone could decode an alchemical text supposedly written by Abraham the Jew, it would be a Spanish Jewish scholar. Nicolas had made copies, careful drawings and transcriptions of some of the key pages from the Book of Abraham. He couldn't bring the book itself. It was too valuable and too dangerous to carry. But he brought enough to show someone what he was working with. So Nicolas walked the Camino, his scribe's eyes scanning every Jewish quarter in every city he passed, asking discreet questions, searching for someone who might recognize the symbols from his drawings. In the city of Leon, in northwestern Spain, Nicolas Flamel found what he was looking for. Or rather, someone found him. Nicolas showed his drawings to a physician in the Jewish quarter, a man whose name has been lost to history. This physician looked at the symbols and immediately sent Nicolas to someone else, a man named Master Canches. Master Canches was described by Nicolas as an elderly Jewish physician and scholar who had deep knowledge of Kabbalah and alchemy. When Nicolas showed him the drawings from the Book of Abraham, Canches became extremely excited. He recognized the text. He knew what it was. According to Nicolas's account, Canches said the book was one of the rarest and most precious alchemical manuscripts in existence. It was called the Ash Mezareph, or was related to that tradition, a text dealing with the alchemical properties of metals and the process of transmutation. But more importantly, Canches could read it. He understood the symbols. He could decode the allegories. And he agreed to return to Paris with Nicolas to study the original book and help him complete the great work. This was an extraordinary decision on Canch's part. He was an old man, and the journey to Paris was long and difficult. Why did he agree? Nicolas's account suggests that Canches was himself an alchemist who had spent his life searching for the Philosopher's Stone. The chance to work with the Book of Abraham, if it was genuine, was irresistible. So the two men set out together, traveling north through Spain, then into France, heading toward Paris. But they would never reach it together. On the road back to Paris, somewhere in France, accounts differ on the exact location, with some saying Orléans, others saying different towns. Master Canche fell ill. Travel in the medieval period was hard on the body, especially for an elderly man. Perhaps it was the strain of the journey. Perhaps it was disease picked up along the way. Perhaps it was simply age catching up with him. Canche's condition deteriorated rapidly. Nicolas tried to care for him, but there was little he could do. Medieval medicine was primitive, based on balancing humours and bloodletting, with no understanding of germs or bacteria, or how disease actually worked. Master Canches knew he was dying, and in those final days, lying in a roadside inn or monastery, he did something extraordinary. He taught Nicolas Flamel everything he knew about the Book of Abraham. He explained the symbols. He decoded the allegories. He taught Nicolas the basic principles of alchemical transmutation as understood by the tradition he represented. He gave Nicolas the key to unlock the book's secrets, and then Master Canches died before ever seeing Paris, before ever laying eyes on the actual Book of Abraham. Nicolas buried him, or saw him buried, and continued his journey home alone. He had left Paris seeking knowledge. He was returning with knowledge, but he had also lost the one person who could have confirmed whether he was interpreting that knowledge correctly. Everything now depended on whether Nicolas had understood Master Canches's teachings, whether the dying man's instructions had been clear enough, whether Nicolas Flamel, a scribe with no formal training in alchemy, could actually perform the great work based on what he had learned. When Nicolas returned to Paris after months on the road, Perenelle must have been relieved to see him alive. The journey had been dangerous and communication was impossible. She would have had no way of knowing whether he was safe or dead. Nicolas shared everything with her. He showed her what he had learned from Master Canches. He explained the symbols in the Book of Abraham. And together, and this is crucial, together they began to prepare for the great work. In his writings, Nicolas always emphasizes that Perenelle was his full partner in the alchemical process. This was unusual enough that he felt the need to state it explicitly. He writes, "I married Perenelle, a most prudent lady, and one well skilled in the sciences. And together we prepared ourselves for the operation. Well skilled in the sciences. This is high praise for a woman in the 14th century. It suggests Perenelle had her own knowledge, her own understanding of alchemy, that she was not simply assisting Nicolas, but actively collaborating with him. They set up a laboratory, probably in their home, in a cellar or back room away from prying eyes. They acquired the necessary equipment, furnaces, crucibles, alembics, distillation devices, various minerals and chemicals. All of this was expensive. Nicolas was spending money he could ill afford on this experiment, but he believed. After 21 years of searching, after traveling to Spain and finding Master Canches, after all the study and struggle, Nicolas Flamel believed he finally understood the secret of the Philosopher's Stone. Now came the test. Could he actually do it? Could he and Perenelle actually transmute base metals into gold? They worked in secret, because the church was suspicious of alchemy. While not explicitly forbidden, alchemy was associated with magic, with attempts to usurp God's creative power. An alchemist who attracted too much attention might face investigation by church authorities. And in the 14th century, church investigations could lead to charges of heresy, which could lead to execution. So Nicolas and Perenelle worked quietly, carefully, following the instructions from the Book of Abraham as interpreted through Master Canches's teachings. And according to Nicolas's account, after 3 years of work, they succeeded. The year was 1382. Nicolas Flamel was 52 years old. He had spent 25 years obsessed with the Book of Abraham, trying to unlock its secrets. He had traveled to Spain and back. He had learned from a dying master. He had spent 3 years in careful, methodical work with his wife. And now, the moment of truth had arrived. The processes were complete. The substances were prepared. The Philosopher's Stone, if they had truly created it, was ready. It was time to attempt transmutation, to see if they could actually turn mercury into silver and silver into gold, to see if 25 years of obsession had led to the greatest discovery in human history, or to nothing but disappointment and wasted time. Nicolas and Perenelle stood in their laboratory, surrounded by furnaces and crucibles and alchemical equipment. Before them was a small amount of mercury, the base metal they would attempt to transmute, and in their hands was the substance they had created, the red powder, the Philosopher's Stone. If it worked, everything would change, not just for them, but for all of human history. If they could prove that transmutation was possible, that the Philosopher's Stone was real, it would revolutionize understanding of matter, of nature, of the universe itself. And if they had also discovered the elixir of life, the liquid form of the stone that granted immortality, they would have defeated death itself. It was January 17th, 1382. The time was exactly noon, and Nicolas Flamel was about to change his life forever. Let me read you Nicolas Flamel's own account of what happened on that winter day in 1382. These words come from his exposition of the hieroglyphical figures, and whether they describe something that really happened or are the most elaborate fiction in alchemical history, they have fascinated people for 600 years. I made projection of the red stone upon a like quantity of mercury, in the presence of Perenelle only, in our house, the 17th day of January, about noon, in the year of the restoring of mankind, 1382, which I transmuted truly into almost as much pure silver, better than that of the mine, as I myself assayed and made others assay many times. January 17th, 1382, at noon. Nicolas is precise about the date and time, which lends a certain credibility to his account. If you're inventing a story, why choose such specific details? According to Nicolas, he took a quantity of mercury, a base metal, liquid at room temperature, silvery and beautiful, but essentially worthless, and mixed it with the red stone, the Philosopher's Stone in its powdered form. The reaction took place in the presence of Perenelle, his witness and co-creator, and the mercury transformed into silver, pure silver, better quality than natural silver from a mine. Can you imagine what that moment must have felt like if it really happened? 25 years of searching, years of study, the journey to Spain, the death of Master Canches. 3 years of careful work. And now, finally, proof. the mercury turning silver before their eyes. Nicolas sees he tested it himself and had others test it. Silver has specific properties: its weight, its color, how it reacts to heat and to certain chemicals. If the substance he created had all the properties of silver, then by the understanding of the time, it was silver. But creating silver from mercury, while impressive, was not the ultimate goal. Silver was valuable, yes, but gold was the true prize. Gold was the perfect metal, the metal of the sun, the metal that represented spiritual and material perfection in alchemical philosophy. So Nicolas and Perenelle continued their work. They had proven the principle. Now, they would attempt the ultimate transmutation. 3 months later, on April the 25th, 1382, Nicolas Flamel recorded his second and most famous transmutation. Following, always word for word, my book, at last I made projection of the red stone upon a like quantity of mercury, still in the presence of Perenelle only, in the same house, the 25th day of April following, at 5 o'clock in the evening, which I transmuted truly into almost as much pure gold, certainly better than common gold, more soft and more pliable. Mercury into gold. The chrysopoeia, the ultimate achievement of alchemy. Again, Nicolas is specific. April 25th, at 5 o'clock in the evening. Again, Perenelle is the sole witness. Again, he emphasizes that he followed his book, the Book of Abraham, word for word. The gold he created was, according to him, better than natural gold, softer, more pliable, more pure. He tested it. Others tested it. It was gold. If this is true, if Nicolas Flamel really did transmute mercury into gold in his laboratory in Paris in 1382, then he achieved what every alchemist in history had dreamed of achieving. He would have been the most successful scientist of his era, the man who unlocked one of the fundamental secrets of the universe. But there's a problem with this story, a significant problem. Nicolas and Perenelle told no one. They published nothing. They didn't announce their discovery. They didn't demonstrate it publicly. They didn't sell the secret for vast wealth. They simply went back to their regular lives. Nicolas continued working as a scribe. They attended church. They lived in the same modest house. Why? If you had discovered the Philosopher's Stone, if you could turn mercury into gold, why would you keep it secret? Why not become the most famous person in the world? Nicolas's answer, written in his account, is that he feared the consequences. He feared that if word got out, he and Perenelle would be in danger from people who would torture them for the secret, or from church authorities who might consider their work heretical, or from the government which might try to force them to create gold for the king's treasury. So they kept silent. They created only small amounts of gold, enough for their needs, but not so much as to attract attention. Except, something did change after 1382. Something very noticeable. Something that Nicolas couldn't hide no matter how much he might have wanted to. After 1382, Nicolas Flamel became wealthy. Dramatically, suddenly, visibly wealthy. This is where the legend meets documented historical fact. Because we have records, actual medieval tax documents, property records, church records, that show Nicolas Flamel acquired significant wealth in the 1380s and 1390s. Before 1382, Nicolas was a modest scribe. He owned his shop and his house, and he lived comfortably but not lavishly. His tax payments were typical for someone of his profession. After 1382, Nicolas began acquiring property, houses in Paris, land outside the city, multiple buildings. The tax records show his wealth increasing dramatically. Where did this money come from? Nicolas never explained it in any official document. There are no business records showing that he expanded his scribe business, no inheritance documents, no partnership agreements that would account for sudden wealth. The money just appeared. And then Nicolas began spending that money in a very specific way. He didn't buy luxuries for himself. He didn't build a palace or acquire a noble title. Instead, he became one of the most generous philanthropists in Paris. Let me list some of what Nicolas and Flamel funded. Churches and chapels. They funded renovations and expansions of at least 14 churches in Paris, including their home parish of Saint-Jacques-de-la-Boucherie. They paid for new bells, new stained glass windows, new altars. Hospitals. They funded the construction of several hospitals for the poor. In medieval Paris, hospitals were charitable institutions run by the church, providing care for those who couldn't afford physicians. Housing for the poor. In 1407, Nicolas purchased land and built a residence for poor widows and orphans, a charitable housing project. This building, at 51 Rue de Montmorency, still stands today. It is the oldest house in Paris. Scholarships. They established funds to support poor scholars, providing money for education. Church repairs. Whenever a church needed repairs, Nicolas and Flamel were generous donors. All of this is documented in church records, in city records, in the grateful inscriptions carved into stone buildings across Paris. Nicolas and Flamel's generosity was public, celebrated, and remembered. But here's what makes this fascinating. While their generosity was public, the source of their wealth remained mysterious. Even their contemporaries didn't know where the money came from. Some assumed Nicolas had been more successful as a scribe than anyone realized. Some thought Flamel had inherited more from her first husband than was generally known. Some whispered about alchemy, about the philosopher's stone, about transmutation. But no one knew for certain, and Nicolas never told them. Nicolas never. When Nicolas built or renovated buildings, he didn't just donate money anonymously, he left his mark. Literally. He carved symbols into the stone, alchemical symbols that can still be seen today. The Flamel house on Rue de Montmorency is covered in these symbols. A dragon, a salamander surrounded by flames, strange inscriptions. The imagery is clearly alchemical, clearly intentional, clearly meant to convey some kind of message. But what message? Alchemists often recorded their knowledge in symbols and allegories because they believed direct, plain language descriptions of their processes would be dangerous in the wrong hands. So they created elaborate symbol systems that could only be understood by other initiates into the alchemical arts. Was Nicolas recording his discovery in stone? Was he leaving an encoded record of how he created the philosopher's stone? Was this his way of sharing the knowledge with future generations while keeping it secret from his contemporaries? Or were the symbols simply decoration, the hobby of a man who was interested in alchemy, even if he'd never actually succeeded at it? We don't know. The symbols remain on the building, waiting for someone to decode them. Hundreds of people have tried over the centuries. Alchemists, scholars, occultists, cryptographers. No one has definitively cracked the code, if there is a code to crack. What's striking about Nicolas Flamel during these years of wealth and generosity is how he remained modest. He continued to work as a scribe. He didn't move to a grander house. He didn't dress in expensive clothes or join the nobility. He and Perenelle continued to live their quiet, pious life, attending church, helping the poor, and keeping to themselves. When people asked about his wealth, Nicolas would simply say that God had blessed his work, and that he was honored to use those blessings to help others. This was the perfect answer. It was vague enough to avoid explanation, but pious enough to deflect further questioning. In a society where ostentation was expected of the wealthy, where displaying your riches was how you maintained social status, Nicolas's modesty was unusual. It suggested either genuine humility or a deliberate strategy to avoid attention. If he had created the Philosopher's Stone, modesty was essential. The last thing he wanted was the French king demanding he create gold for the royal treasury, or rival alchemists trying to steal his secrets, or church authorities investigating whether his work was heretical. So Nicolas played the role of the humble, charitable scribe who had been fortunate in his business dealings. And for the most part, people accepted this explanation, or at least they pretended to accept it. But in the alchemical community, the network of people across Europe who studied the great work, rumors spread. People whispered that Nicolas Flamel had done it, that he had actually achieved transmutation, that the Philosopher's Stone was real and Nicolas had found it. His name began to appear in alchemical texts written by others. He became, even in his own lifetime, a legend. For the next 30+ years, Nicolas and Perenelle lived this double life. Publicly, they were generous philanthropists, model citizens, devoted Christians. Privately, they were, if the legends are true, immortal alchemists who had defeated death itself. Because the Philosopher's Stone wasn't just supposed to transmute metals, it was also supposed to create the elixir of life, a substance that could cure all diseases and grant eternal youth. Did Nicolas and Perenelle drink the elixir? Did they achieve immortality? In 1397, Perenelle died. Or at least, she appeared to die. She was buried with honor in the church of Saint-Jacques de la Boucherie. In 1418, Nicolas himself died at the age of 88. He was buried next to Perenelle, in a tomb decorated with symbols of their life and work. The good citizens of Paris mourned. The churches they had funded said prayers for their souls. Their wealth was distributed according to their will, to charities, to the poor, to the church. It should have been the end of the story. A successful scribe and his wife, who made money through shrewd business, or perhaps through alchemy, who used that money to help others, and who died peacefully in old age. A good life, a meaningful life, a life worth remembering. But then, centuries later, the graves were opened, and they were empty, and the sightings began. According to historical records, Perenelle died sometime in the 1390s. Sources differ on the exact date, with some saying 1397 and others 1410. She was buried in the church of Saint-Jacques de la Boucherie, in a tomb that Nicolas commissioned, decorated with alchemical symbols and inscriptions honoring her as his beloved wife and partner. Nicolas outlived her by perhaps 20 years, continuing his charitable works until his own death on March 22nd, 1418. He was, by most accounts, 88 years old, a remarkable age for the medieval period, when life expectancy was much shorter than today. His funeral was well attended. He had been a respected member of the community for decades, known for his generosity and piety. He was buried next to Perenelle in the church of Saint-Jacques de la Boucherie, in a tomb he had prepared years earlier. Both tombs were elaborate, showing Nicolas and Perenelle as patrons and donors with inscriptions celebrating their charitable works. These were the tombs of people who wanted to be remembered, who had lived good lives and died at peace. That should have been the end. A long life, a peaceful death, an honored burial. The story of Nicolas Flamel should have ended in 1418, but stories have a way of refusing to end when we want them to. During the French Revolution in the 1790s, over 300 years after Nicolas's death, the church of Saint-Jacques de la Boucherie was demolished. The revolutionary government had no patience for elaborate churches, which they saw as symbols of the corrupt old regime. The church was torn down stone by stone. The tombs inside the church were opened and the bodies relocated, or at least that was the plan. The elaborate tombstones of Nicolas and Perenelle Flamel were moved to what is now the Musée de Cluny, the National Museum of the Middle Ages in Paris, where they can still be seen today. But here's the mystery. When the graves were opened, no bodies were found. The graves were empty, no bones, no remains, nothing. Now, there are several possible explanations for this. Explanation 1. Grave robbers. In the chaos of the revolution, graveyards were often looted, bodies were stolen, bones were scattered, tombs were vandalized. It's entirely possible that Nicolas and Perenelle's remains were stolen at some point between 1418 and the 1790s. Explanation 2. Misidentification. Perhaps the tombs that were opened were not actually Nicolas and Perenelle's graves, but memorials. Perhaps they had been buried elsewhere, and the elaborate tombs were just cenotaphs, empty commemorative monuments. Explanation 3. They were never there. Perhaps Nicolas and Perenelle never died at all. Perhaps they faked their deaths, were buried in empty graves, and walked away to continue their immortal lives in secret. Which explanation you believe probably depends on your general worldview, but the fact remains, the graves were empty. And this fact gave new life to an old legend. If Nicolas Flamel had really discovered the Philosopher's Stone, if he had really created the elixir of life, then he would be immortal. And an immortal alchemist would have good reason to fake his death eventually. After living in one place for too long, people would notice that you weren't aging. Suspicion would grow. Questions would be asked. Better to stage a death, be buried, and move on to a new city, a new identity, a new life, and then do it again a century later, and again. Living forever, but always hidden, always moving, always one step ahead of those who might discover the truth. The empty graves gave fuel to this theory, and then came the sightings. In the 17th and 18th centuries, stories began to circulate about Nicolas Flamel being seen alive. The most famous account comes from a man named Paul Lucas, who was a French antiquarian and traveller. In 1735, he published a book about his travels in Turkey, Greece, and the Middle East. In this book, Lucas tells an extraordinary story. While in Turkey, he met a Turkish dervish, a mystical Islamic scholar, who told him about a secret society of immortal alchemists. According to the dervish, these alchemists had all discovered the Philosopher's Stone and achieved immortality. They met every few decades at secret locations around the world to share knowledge and guide humanity's development. And according to the dervish, Nicolas Flamel was one of these immortals. Lucas was skeptical but intrigued. And then, in 1761, Over 300 years after Nicolas's supposed death, Lucas claimed to have met Nicolas Flamel himself in India. Lucas described encountering an elderly European man who spoke French and said his name was Nicolas Flamel. This man knew intimate details about 15th century Paris that would be impossible for anyone to know unless they had lived there. He spoke casually about events from 300 years earlier, as if they had happened recently. Lucas asked the obvious question, but Nicolas Flamel died in 1418. How can you be him? The man smiled and said, "Death is not what you think it is. The Philosopher's Stone frees us from death's grip." Before Lucas could ask more questions, the man disappeared into the crowded streets of the Indian city, and Lucas never saw him again. Is this story true? Almost certainly not. Lucas was known for telling entertaining tales in his travel books, and this story has all the hallmarks of a good yarn designed to sell books. But it captured the popular imagination. The idea of Nicolas Flamel, still alive, still wandering the world, was too compelling to dismiss. Another famous sighting supposedly occurred in Paris in 1761, the same year as the India sighting, interestingly enough. Multiple people reported seeing a man at the Paris Opera who looked exactly like the portraits of Nicolas Flamel from the 1400s. Same face, same age, same bearing. He was dressed in old-fashioned clothes, and he watched the performance with interest. After the opera, several people approached him, wanting to ask who he was and why he looked so much like the legendary Alchemist. But before they could reach him, he vanished into the crowd. Again, this story is almost certainly apocryphal, but it became part of the legend. Nicolas Flamel, the immortal alchemist, occasionally appearing in Paris, the city he had loved, watching how the world had changed, then disappearing before anyone could confirm his identity. Throughout the 1800s and 1900s, occultists and alchemists continued to claim contact with Nicolas Flamel. Albert Pike, the famous American Freemason and occultist, wrote in the 1800s that Flamel was still alive and was a member of a secret society of immortal masters who guided humanity from behind the scenes. Various theosophists and occult societies claim to receive teachings from Flamel, channeled through mediums, or received in visions. These teachings usually involved alchemical and mystical knowledge, presented in the flowery, allegorical language typical of occult literature. Alchemical texts from the 1900s reference Flamel as a living master, someone who had achieved the great work and now existed on a higher plane of being, occasionally manifesting in physical form to teach worthy students. And even today, in the 21st century, you can find people who claim to have seen Nicolas Flamel, or who believe he is still alive somewhere, having successfully achieved immortality through alchemy. Most of these claims are obviously fantasy, but they speak to something deeper. Our desire to believe that death can be defeated, that ancient wisdom holds secrets modern science has forgotten, that somewhere out there, someone has discovered how to live forever. Nicolas Flamel has become a symbol of this hope. Whether he was real or not, whether he achieved anything or not, the legend of Nicolas Flamel offers us a vision of what we wish were possible. So what is the truth? Did Nicolas Flamel discover the Philosopher's Stone? Did he transmute lead into gold? Did he achieve immortality and fake his death in 1418? Or was he simply a successful businessman who created an elaborate legend to explain wealth that came from more mundane sources? The evidence is contradictory. The legends are compelling, the facts are sparse, and 600 years later we are still trying to solve the mystery. Let us examine the theories one by one and see if we can finally determine who Nicolas Flamel really was. Before we dive into theories, let's be clear about what we actually know. Not legend, not speculation, but documented historical fact. We know Nicolas Flamel was a real person who lived in Paris from approximately 1330 to 1418. He worked as a scribe and bookseller. He married a woman named Perenelle. He became significantly wealthy in the 1380s to 1390s, documented in tax records. He spent that wealth on charitable works, documented in church records. He built or funded numerous buildings, some still standing today. He decorated these buildings with alchemical symbols. He wrote, or someone wrote under his name, texts describing alchemical transmutation. He died in 1418 and was buried. His graves were later found empty, though this could have many explanations. We don't know the source of his wealth, whether he actually performed alchemical transmutation, whether the Book of Abraham the Jew ever existed, whether his own writings are genuine or fabricated, why his graves were empty, whether any of the post-death sightings have any truth to them. Now, let's examine the major theories about who Nicolas Flamel really was. Theory 1. He really did it. The alchemical success. This is the theory that Nicolas himself promoted, that he discovered the Book of Abraham, learned its secrets, and successfully created the Philosopher's Stone. Evidence 4. His own detailed, specific account of transmutation with exact dates and times. His sudden, unexplained wealth appearing in the 1380s, exactly when he claimed to achieve transmutation. The alchemical symbols on all his buildings, suggesting deep involvement in alchemy. His partnership with Perenelle, suggesting shared alchemical work. The fact that he never offered alternative explanation for his wealth. The empty graves, consistent with immortality theory. Centuries of sightings by credible witnesses. His reputation among other alchemists as someone who had succeeded. Evidence against. No physical evidence of the Philosopher's Stone or transmuted gold. No one else has ever successfully replicated his method from his writings. Modern chemistry proves that chemical transmutation is impossible, requires nuclear reactions. More plausible explanations exist for his wealth. The empty graves could be explained by grave robbery. The sightings are all anecdotal and unverifiable. His account could be fiction designed to explain wealth from other sources. Modern scientific perspective. We now know that transmuting lead or mercury into gold requires changing the atomic structure of elements, which cannot be done through chemical processes. You would need particle accelerators and massive amounts of energy. Medieval alchemists, no matter how skilled, could not have achieved this. However, it's worth noting that alchemists did make genuine chemical discoveries. They might have created gold-colored alloys that looked like gold, but weren't. They might have purified existing gold to make it appear as if they'd created it. Nicolas could have genuinely believed he had achieved transmutation, even if modern chemistry would explain his results differently. Theory 2. Successful businessman. The prosaic explanation. This theory suggests Nicolas was simply a very successful scribe and bookseller who accumulated wealth through completely legitimate business means, then created the alchemical legend for various reasons. Evidence. 4. Medieval manuscripts were extremely valuable. Rare books could sell for enormous sums. Scribes who dealt in rare manuscripts could become wealthy. Perenelle brought some wealth from her previous marriage. They had no children, so all their wealth accumulated rather than being divided. Paris real estate in the 1300s to 1400s was a smart investment. Nicolas had decades to accumulate wealth. Gradually, successful businessmen often created legends about themselves. This is by far the most historically plausible explanation. Evidence against. If he was just a businessman, why create the elaborate alchemical story? Why spend years writing detailed accounts of transmutation? Why cover his buildings in alchemical symbols? If the wealth was legitimate, why not just explain it? His contemporaries already speculated about alchemy, suggesting the business explanation wasn't satisfying. Why he might have created the legend. Protection. Claiming alchemical wealth might have protected him from robbery. Can't steal the Philosopher's Stone if you can't find it. Tax avoidance. Unexplained wealth from alchemy might have been less taxable than declared business income. Reputation. Being known as a successful alchemist brought respect in certain circles, genuine interest. He might have been fascinated by alchemy, even if he never succeeded, and the legend grew from there. This is the theory most historians favor. It's prosaic. It doesn't require believing in anything impossible, and it fits the known facts reasonably well. Theory 3. Money laundering or hidden patronage. This theory suggests Nicolas was handling money for someone else, possibly Jewish merchants who faced legal restrictions, or possibly as an agent for a wealthy patron who wanted to fund charitable works anonymously. Evidence 4 would explain sudden wealth with no documented source, would explain why he couldn't reveal the real source, legal or political reasons. The alchemy story would be perfect cover. He had connections to Jewish scholars, his trip to Spain, the Book of Abraham. His charitable works might have been directed by a patron, evidence against. Purely speculative with no direct evidence. Medieval financial records are incomplete, but not completely absent. Hard to hide this. Doesn't explain why he'd go to such lengths to create the alchemical legend. Doesn't fit his reputation as an honest, pious man. Theory 4. The legend grew after his death. This theory suggests that Nicolas was a moderately successful scribe who had some interest in alchemy, but most of the legend, including the Book of Abraham story and the Transmutation accounts, were invented or embellished by others after his death. Evidence 4. Many alchemical texts were falsely attributed to famous historical figures. The detailed accounts of his transmutation appear in manuscripts from after his death. Legends naturally grow and elaborate over time. Later alchemists needed success stories to justify their work. Exposition of the hieroglyphical figures might have been written by someone else. Evidence against. His wealth was documented during his lifetime. Hard to fake that. Contemporary sources mention his alchemical interests while he was alive. The buildings he constructed with symbols were built during his life. Too many specific, verifiable details for pure post-death invention. After examining all the theories and evidence, here is what seems most likely. Nicolas Flamel was probably a real person who lived as a scribe in Paris, someone with genuine interest in alchemy, common for educated people of his era, a successful businessman who accumulated significant wealth, possibly through rare book dealing, someone who either believed he had achieved some form of alchemical success or deliberately created that story, a genuinely charitable person who used his wealth to help others. The Philosopher's Stone story probably has some basis in Nicolas's real interests and possibly in experiments he conducted, was elaborated by Nicolas himself to explain his wealth or to create a lasting legacy. was further embellished after his death by later writers and alchemists. The immortality claims are almost certainly false from a scientific standpoint, the result of wishful thinking, mistaken identity, and deliberate hoaxes. A symbol of humanity's eternal desire to defeat death. The mystery endures because we'll never have complete records from the 14th century. Nicolas deliberately created ambiguity about his wealth source. The legend serves important psychological and cultural functions. Some questions simply cannot be answered 600 years later. The house still stands at 51 Rue de Montmorency in Paris, the oldest house in the city, built by Nicolas Flamel in 1407. You can visit it today. You can touch the stones he touched. You can see the alchemical symbols he carved, still visible after 600 years. Inside, it's now a restaurant, and you can sit at a table and eat dinner surrounded by the work of a man who died over 600 years ago. His house has outlived him by centuries. His name is still remembered. His mystery still captivates us. Did Nicolas Flamel discover the Philosopher's Stone? Almost certainly not in the literal sense that modern chemistry would recognize. Did he transmute lead into gold? Probably not, though he may have performed experiments that he believed were transmutation. Did he achieve immortality? Number. Nicolas Flamel died, like all humans die. His body may have been lost or stolen, but the man himself ended like we all will end. But here's what Nicolas Flamel did achieve. He created a legend that has lasted 600 years. Most people leave no mark on history. They live, they die, they are forgotten. But Nicolas Flamel, a middle-class scribe with no special birth or title, created a mystery so compelling that we are still talking about him 6 centuries later. He inspired centuries of alchemists. Every alchemist who came after Nicolas Flamel looked at his story and thought, if he could do it, maybe I can too. His legend gave hope to people searching for hidden knowledge, for secret truths, for ways to transcend human limitations. He influenced culture profoundly, from Renaissance alchemical texts to modern fantasy novels, from occult philosophies to Harry Potter. Nicolas Flamel's name appears again and again. He became a symbol of the search for hidden knowledge, of the quest for immortality, of the belief that ancient wisdom holds secrets modern science has forgotten. He achieved a form of immortality, not the immortality of never dying, but the immortality of being remembered, of having his name spoken by people who weren't even born in the same millennium as him, of having his house still standing, still visited, still inspiring wonder. That's a kind of philosopher's stone, isn't it? Not the literal ability to turn lead into gold, but the ability to transform an ordinary life into legend. To take the base metal of everyday existence and transmute it into something that shines across centuries. Modern chemists often dismiss medieval alchemy as pseudoscience, as wasted effort based on false assumptions. And from a purely chemical standpoint, they're right. You cannot turn lead into gold through the methods alchemists used. But alchemy was never just about chemistry. It was also a spiritual and philosophical practice. The transmutation of metals was meant to mirror the transmutation of the soul. The Philosopher's Stone wasn't just a magical rock. It was a symbol of perfected wisdom, of enlightenment, of the transformation of the self from base matter into something noble and precious. When alchemists said they were trying to turn lead into gold, many of them meant it both literally and metaphorically. They were trying to perfect matter, and perfect themselves simultaneously. Nicolas Flamel, whether he knew it or not, achieved the spiritual goal of alchemy. He transformed himself from a simple scribe into a legend. He turned the lead of an ordinary life into the gold of an extraordinary story. And that transformation, from man to myth, is real. It happened. We can trace it through history, through the buildings he left, through the writings attributed to him, through the 600 years of people who have told and retold his story. Was Nicolas Flamel a charlatan who invented the whole alchemical story? Or did he genuinely believe he had achieved transmutation? Was he a successful businessman who used mystery to protect his wealth? Or did he discover something that science still doesn't understand? Did he die in 1418? Or did he fake his death and live on in secret? We will never know for certain. The evidence is too fragmentary, too contradictory, too obscured by time and legend. But maybe that's appropriate. Maybe mysteries should remain mysteries. Maybe some questions are more valuable than their answers. Because the mystery of Nicolas Flamel has inspired people for 600 years. It has sparked curiosity, encouraged dreams, made people believe that impossible things might be possible. If we definitively solved the mystery, if we found documents proving he was just a businessman, or conversely, if we found the Philosopher's Stone in a basement somewhere, would that make his story more powerful or less? Sometimes the greatest treasures are the ones we never quite reach. The greatest discoveries are the ones we never quite make. The greatest transformations are the ones that happen in our imagination, in our hope, in our refusal to accept that the world is entirely explainable and mundane. If you visit Paris, go to 51 Rue de Montmorency, stand in front of the Flamel house. Look at the symbols carved into the stone, the dragon, the salamander, the mysterious inscriptions. Touch the wall if you want. It has been standing for over 600 years. It will probably stand for 600 more. And ask yourself, what do I believe about Nicolas Flamel? Do you believe he was a successful businessman who created a clever legend? Do you believe he was a genuine alchemist who achieved something science cannot explain? Do you believe he discovered secrets that have been lost to time? Your answer will tell you something about yourself, about what you want to believe is possible, about whether you think the universe still holds mysteries that reason cannot solve. I cannot tell you what to believe, but I can tell you this. Nicolas Flamel succeeded at something very few humans ever succeed at. He made himself immortal. Not through a magical stone or a mystical elixir, but through story, through mystery, through becoming a legend. 600 years after his death, or after his disappearance, if you prefer, we are still talking about him. His house still stands. His name is still known. His mystery still fascinates us. That is the real Philosopher's Stone. The ability to transform yourself into something that transcends death. Not by living forever, but by being remembered forever. And whether Nicolas Flamel discovered that secret deliberately or stumbled into it accidentally, he achieved it completely. If you've been fascinated by this mystery, please like this video and subscribe. We explore the enigmas of history, not always the dark ones, but the strange and beautiful ones too. The stories that remind us that the past still holds secrets we may never fully understand. In the comments, tell me, do you think Nicolas Flamel really discovered the Philosopher's Stone, or was he simply a brilliant storyteller? Let me know your theory. Thank you for joining me on this journey through medieval Paris and alchemical legend. Thank you for exploring this mystery with me. May Nicolas Flamel, wherever he is, in the ground, in legend, or walking the earth immortal, be at peace. And may we never lose our fascination with the impossible.